What is up, everybody? Today we got these rare Pit Crew Oregon Jordan 3s, and today I'm gonna go in depth on how to properly repaint a black and white Jordan 3 midsole. Let's get started. So the client went ahead and sent these already with the paint fully stripped, so we're not gonna worry about that today. However, there is still some paint all around the midsole, so real quick we're gonna grab some alcohol wipe pads and wipe it off. Pro tip, to get a clean midsole repaint at the end, you gotta remove every single piece of paint. You wanna have a clean base to work with. You never wanna paint over cracked paint. What's gonna happen is the cracked paint that's underneath is gonna crack even further, causing the top paint to crack as well. Got all the little paint off the midsole. You can't really tell, but it makes a huge difference at the end when the paint job is fully done. When I was scraping all the paint off the edges, I left a lot of debris all around the midsoles. I need to blow all that stuff off using the air compressor because again, I want the cleanest base possible before I paint. Step 1, prep work is complete. We got every little piece of paint off the midsoles. That's really important before we can move forward. The next step is taping. For this part, it's also really important to take your time. For taping, it's really important you cover up every single part of the shoe that you don't want to get paint on, but at the same time, you don't want to get any of the tape on the midsole because that will mess with the paint job. For years, I've always used Scotch tape for two big reasons. The first, it adheres the best to a lot of different materials. And second, it always gives me the sharpest lines. When it comes to taping rubber, nubuck, or other materials where the tape doesn't adhere very well, a good way to get it to adhere better is by heating up that material very lightly. To avoid getting any paint on the uppers, tape as closest to the edge as possible. If you can, get it underneath the midsole without causing any damage. That'll avoid getting any paint on the elephant print or leather. Another thing you want to avoid is getting any tape on the midsole, because once you're done with the paint job, when it's time to remove the tape, some of that paint job will come off with it. Once the tape job is complete, I always go back with a pair of scissors and press down tightly to make sure I avoid any paint leakage once the paint is applied. Tape job is complete, took care of the uppers and soles. The key is taking your time. The last thing we gotta take care of is the air units. There's really no easy way on doing this. You gotta take your time. Basically all you do is grab a tape and start cutting little strips out as clean as possible, and I start laying them in. You don't wanna get any tape on the midsole because when I airbrush the paint and I go in and remove the tape once it's done, it's gonna peel off the paint. It's not gonna look good, so avoid that. Take your time, lay down all the tape, and just cover up the plastic air unit. When you're working with the air units, it can be very tedious. You just gotta take your time, use the scissors, use the X-Acto knife. It's better to leave some of the air unit exposed instead of getting tape on the midsole. Because if you get paint on the air unit, you can just go in and scrape it off. Now the last thing we gotta do before we start airbrushing is we gotta fully cover up the uppers and soles to avoid getting any overspray. We don't want any sloppy work. After that, we'll set up the compressor and airbrush to start painting. All right, let's start painting. What you're gonna need is a compressor and an airbrush. I use Iwata, it works great, but you don't need these bigger brands in order to airbrush. You could get away with using one from Harbor Freight. They work just as well. The key is keeping the airbrush clean after every use. Once the paint starts to dry up, that's when you have problems. So all you need is the airbrush and compressor to airbrush your paint, real easy. One more thing I wanna talk about is the paint that I use. For airbrushing, I always use Jacquard because it's already ready to go for the airbrush. I don't need to thin it out or add anything else. It's one less step that I gotta worry about. Before we pour the paint into our airbrush and start painting, the last thing we gotta do is grab the compressor and blow off the midsoles one more time. I wanna get rid of any debris that's possibly on there because it will show once I start painting. And lastly, if you're airbrushing, make sure you're in a well-ventilated area and wearing a mask because you don't want to be bringing this stuff in. One of the most common questions that I get asked is, how many coats does it take to get the paint fully on solid? It depends on what the color is. I never really count, I just lay down until it's fully solid. As you can see, when I'm using the airbrush, I always move it back and forth. I never focus in one spot. If I do, that can create paint puddles on the midsole. White paint requires more coats than your average color. Take your time, be patient, apply thin, even coats. Eventually, it will get solid. Got a lot of white paint on these midsoles. I would say we're about 80% there. In some areas, it looks really smooth. In other areas, it looks really rough. That's because these polyurethane midsoles can be very porous. So to get rid of that, we'll be using some 800 grit sandpaper. We're gonna hit the entire midsole until that roughness is gone. This process isn't really pretty. It requires a lot of the paint that I just applied to be removed, but the ending results will speak for itself. The idea is to get the paint job as smooth as possible, even if it looks bad at first. Sanding is complete for now. I did get it nice and smooth. We removed about 15% of the paint, but I'll come back later and reapply that. There's a lot of scuffs, so we need more white. But for now, my next focus is these craters on the midsole. I'm guessing during the prep work of removing the paint, they might have scratched too deep into the midsole and removed little chunks of it. It's noticeable now that the paint is on there. So what we're gonna do next is use some Mod Podge and a spatula. Basically, I'm gonna go in, apply a nice coat on those little holes all around the midsole. It's not just that area. Let it sit for a good 30 to 45 minutes. Once it's fully dry, we'll grab some sandpaper and sand it to get nice and smooth. This stuff is really easy to use. You just gotta apply a nice thin even coat on the damaged areas. You don't need to apply too much. Mod Podge requires a little bit more elbow grease when trying to sand it even and blend it in with the rest of the midsole. Patience is key for this step. Mod Podge is fully dried. I waited a good hour. It's really rough right now, so we gotta go in with some 400 grit sandpaper this time and sand it down. Once it's fully done, those craters should be filled in. Painting a midsole correctly is a process. It requires going back and forth with painting and sanding to get the best results possible. Trust the process. Sanding is complete. We're all done with the 400 grit. It's nice and smooth. However, we did wipe off a lot of the paint. It's pretty scuffed up, so we gotta go back in and lay down some more white. Same thing, we'll lay down some nice even coats all around. Keep in mind to use the heat gun throughout the process. I usually dry my paint after every couple of fresh coats to keep the process moving. The white paint job on this midsole is looking really good. We're gonna have to sand one more time to get it as smooth as possible. This time we'll be using 1200 grit. We'll go over it one more time and then hit it with one final coat of white paint before we move on to the black. Before I lay down the paint, I gotta blow off any paint debris that's on the midsoles. If I paint over the old paint debris, it will show at the end. White paint job is fully complete. Took a lot of work, a lot of paint, and a lot of sanding, but I'm really proud of this one. It looks factory. We covered up all the pores and the craters. Now we gotta move on to the black. But before we do that, we gotta clean up our tape because this will mess with our lines. On this side is a lot of debris such as lint. If I go in and tape it off just as is, the lines are gonna be a little crooked when you look close up. We don't want that. So real quick, I'm gonna grab some tape and simply clean up the tape. One of my biggest keys to getting a clean, consistent line throughout the whole midsole is to use 1 or 2 long pieces of tape. The trick is to stretch and pull while pressing down onto the midsole. Now for the black paint, it should take only 2 to 3 coats to fully lay down, especially because all the prep work is fully done. Another thing I did real quick using some scissors, I carefully pressed down on the edges of the tape to prevent any black paint from getting underneath. Most bad quality paint jobs are caused by thick coats. That's also why paint jobs crack so easily. So again, thin even coats is the way to do it. Black is laid down. Overall, it looks really smooth, but I can get it a little smoother. So we got our 1200 grit sandpaper. We're gonna hit it one more time and then finish it off with one final coat of black paint. When sanding down the black paint, I'm trying to be very careful and not sand where the tape is. I don't want it to peel off in any way because I still gotta go in and apply more black paint. Once you're all done sanding down the black paint, it's gonna look bad and scuffed up, but as long as it's smooth, we're going in the right direction. We're almost done with this step. We're gonna sand one more time, apply some more paint, sand one final time, and apply one final coat of black paint. Black is fully laid down. On these Oregon 3s, on the black specifically, it has a really high gloss finish, so we're gonna recreate that using some Krylon. Laying down the finisher is really easy, but you don't want to overdo it. If you apply too much or create a puddle of finisher on the midsole, it can ruin it. Finisher's fully dried, only took about 5 minutes. Now let's remove the tape. This is where I find out how well of a tape job I did. If it's a bad one, we're gonna have a bunch of paint on the uppers or the freshly white painted midsoles, or even worse, all the white paint is gonna peel right off with the tape. Moment of truth. Tape is off, so far so good. We do have some tape inside the air units, so with a little pick, we're gonna take it out. Almost done with the paint job, we got the tape off. Scotch works really well, however, it does leave a lot of residue behind, especially all over the rubber soles. That's just because of the heat gun. Luckily, we got a glue eraser. It's really easy to use. All you gotta do is scrub on the rubber sole and all the residue will come right off. Tape residue is off. Now this is a clean midsole repaint, however, it's not fully done yet. 95% of the time when I take the tape off after a midsole repaint, I always need touch-ups. If you look closely in the air unit, there's some black overspray in that area. It's tiny, but it's a little sloppy. Same thing with this corner right here. We get a little black line right there. I don't like it. You gotta go in with some Andalus black and some Andalus white and a tiny detail brush to make it look perfect. As good of a tape job as I did, I still got some paint leakage onto the rubber sole. That's okay, that happens almost every time. For this, I always use a Rejuvenator wipe to wipe it all off. My only tips here is to take your time, have a steady hand, and hold your breath. Midsole repaint is fully complete. Now these are expensive shoes and I want to send these back to the client as presentable as possible. We didn't give them a cleaning because they just didn't need it, but it could use a good wipe down. On the toe caps, there's a bunch of scuffs, so we'll be using our Rejuvenator wipes to wipe them down. We'll also be using our Rejuvenator shoe trees to reshape the overall shoe. So you can see there's a lot of creases. The shoe trees will take care of that. And lastly, we're gonna make the shoes smell fresh as using our Rejuvenator deodorizer. Let's take care of all that. Alright everybody, that is going to bring us to an end on this in-depth tutorial on how to properly repaint a Jordan 3 black and white midsole. These Oregons look factory. It did take a lot of work though. It's not easy. This took me hours. On this video it's probably going to take me 5 to 10 minutes, but in reality it was hours of sanding, laying down paint. It was just a repetitive process. There's really no easy way to do it. You just got to take your time to get clean factory results. I do want to brag though. These are the brand new 2022 Fire Red Jordan 3s. Clean shoe overall. But if you get a close-up at these midsoles, it's pretty bad. The lines are pretty jagged, it's not sharp at all. Underneath, by the air unit, there's a lot of red paint, super sloppy. So all you gotta do is take your time and you'll get better results in the factory, every time. You can find all the products at rejuvenator.com. Use my promo code down below to save some money. I hope you guys found this video educational. I'm Vick Almighty. I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.